Good evening. Calling to order the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District Hearing Board of May the 21st, 2007, starting at 5:37 p.m., Monday the 21st, 2007. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Gasparino?
Here.
Mr. Herlock?
Here.
Dr. Shackman?
Here.
Mr. Stubblefield?
Here.
Chair Nicewinder? Here. Thank you.
And as Vice Chair, I will gladly turn over the proceedings to the Chair of the Hearing Board.
Apologies for my lateness. Call the hearing board to order. We've already called the roll. Thank you. And we will have a couple things on tap this evening. I believe the first item on the agenda is a report from the staff. Is that not right?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you.
Several months ago, we brought before your board several petitions for variance that dealt with diesel internal combustion engines, stationary diesel engines, and your board had some great concerns about granting those variances because one of the findings that's in the district rule 123 is it states that granting the variance that continued operation of the equipment is not likely to create an immediate threat or hazard to public health or safety. The state of California and the Air Resources Board had determined that diesel particulate emissions were an air toxic contaminant, and in the state's findings when they made that determination, I think they found that there were no acceptable levels of diesel particulate emissions. So your board asked staff and council to discuss this matter and bring back to you some type of a recommendation or policy or determination. So happens that last week at the district offices, the Air Resources Board conducted an advanced hearing board workshop. And I wasn't in attendance, but Mr. Kwong, Mr. Oriana were at that workshop. And I understand that there was a discussion about this finding. Several of your board members, Mr. Gasparino, Mr. Herlock, and Mr. Stubblefield were at that workshop. And I understand that there was a discussion about this finding, and ARB made some comments about what your board could do with respect to this finding. It's my understanding that their number one recommendation was that we should revise our Rule 123 and remove that from the required findings. I've already talked with our director about making that change to our rule book, and he's in agreement with it. However, it does take approximately 6 months for us to get a rule change through the workshop and advisory committee and then to the Air Pollution Control Board.
I am absolutely certain that Mr. Herlock will have comments. It was originally your concern that caused this to come back to the board.
I think it was, and I was also at the discussion with ARB, who said that Mr. Duvall didn't mention it, but they basically said that any denial of a variance that found the first 6 findings but denied the variance based on finding our finding number 8 would probably not survive a challenge because that finding isn't part of state law. But I appreciate the response, and I do understand the action. It does take some time. If I would be willing to be present at an advisory committee meeting if that would be helpful when it does come up on their agenda. But I know that the times and notices and so forth do take time, so thank you for the response and the position I agree with.
Yeah, in the future, until we can make that change, I think what we're going to have to do, if we do have a petition that comes before your board that deals with an air toxic or some type of a toxic contaminant, we will have to somehow justify granting the variance in spite of that finding. As I said in my memo, we believe that this finding was put into the rule book when it was first written or sometime around 1976. And just in looking at the way it's written, it's kind of my gut feeling it was put into the rule books to prevent a source from having an emission during a variance that would be highly toxic, something like hydrogen sulfide that could really be a deadly source of emissions. And I think my feeling is that just based on the way it's written, how it says immediate threat or hazard to the public health or safety. There is the finding just before that that says that a nuisance, according to Rule 51, will not occur. And I think that would be sufficient protection to prohibit some highly toxic release occurring during a variance period. So I think there still is a protection there without this finding number 8.
Mr. Duval, the difference between a nuisance per Rule 51 and the Rule 123 immediate health and safety seems vast. And frankly, the Rule 123 finding appears to be an appropriate matter for this board's consideration. And yet we're getting word, I guess, from the ARB that we're out of line by having the rule at all. Is that correct?
That's what I understand was their position last week.
What they said, and maybe one of our counsels would be able to explain it better, what I understood them to say was that if we were able to make the 6 findings that are in state law and the finding that there's no nuisance and denied a variance based on not being able to make our finding number 8, that an appeal to that denial would probably lose.
Understood. Does anyone else have any comments or questions of the district staff?
No, but I just want to corroborate what Mr. Herlock just said. That was also my understanding, the way it was explained to us by ARB.
Okay. Mr. Duval, anything else?
That's all I have on this item.
Well, in that case, we will move on to the next item on the agenda. We will be hearing petition number 794, petition of the Air Pollution Control Officer for an order for abatement against Stir Crazy Coffee for potential violations of APCD Rule 51 and California Health and Safety Code Section 40700. Will the representatives of the petitioner and the responding parties please stand? If you're going to give testimony tonight, you need to stand and be sworn.
Please raise your right hand. You and each of you do solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give in the matters now pending before this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Keith Duvall, manager of the Compliance Division for the Air Pollution Control District. And tonight we're asking that your board issue an order of abatement against Stir Crazy Coffee located at 11534 North Ventura Avenue in Ojai. We're alleging that Stir Crazy Coffee is a source of odors that are causing a nuisance to residents of a neighborhood that is within several hundred yards of the business. The basis of our petition is a violation of District Rule 51, nuisance, and State Health and Safety Code Section 41700. Stir Crazy Coffee is a retail coffee house that roasts green coffee beans on their premises. The coffee roasting machine used by Stir Crazy Coffee does not require a permit from the Air Pollution Control District, but it still must comply with the nuisance provisions of the district rules and regulations and the state health and safety code. Stir Crazy Coffee has recently closed and been put up for sale. However, the coffee roaster is still in the building and is capable of being used. One of our last communications with Ms. Janine Ames, who's owner of Stir Crazy Coffee, was that she might decide to continue roasting coffee beans. Based upon this statement, we believe it's in the public's best interest to proceed with our petition for an abatement order. Beginning in October 2002, the district started receiving complaints from residents of the area around Stir Crazy Coffee. Most of the complaints we received were from residents of Orchard Drive in Ojai. To date, the district has received 230 complaints alleging that Stir Crazy Coffee was emitting offensive odors. Complainants described the odor as a stench, horrible, smelling like hell, and burnt popcorn. Attachment 4 of our petition includes the complainant's statements. Where the district conducted an investigation of a complaint, our comments are also included. On at least 12 occasions, district inspection staff detected coffee roasting odors during Stir Crazy's coffee roasting operation. Attachment 5 of our petition includes the complaint and the district's observations when an odor was detected. District staff has detected the odors in areas immediately adjacent to Stir Crazy Coffee and on Orchard Drive. I have experienced the odors on 2 occasions. On at least 3 of the 12 occasions, more than one district staff member smelled the odor of coffee roasting at the same time. Since 2002, the district has attempted to work with Stir Crazy Coffee for ways to minimize their odors. For a period of time, Stir Crazy Coffee installed and operated an afterburner on the exhaust of their coffee roaster. The afterburner had some success in reducing the number of complaint calls. However, we did continue to receive odor complaints. In July 2006, the afterburner failed and was out of service for at least 2 months. During this time, the number of complaints increased significantly. In February of this year, Stir Crazy Coffee was required to remove their afterburner because they did not have the proper permits for its installation and use from the county's Building and Safety Department. On approximately 33 dates, the district has verified that Stir Crazy Coffee was roasting coffee at the same time an odor complaint was made to the district. The district confirmed this by direct contact with Ms. Ames or other workers at Stir Crazy Coffee. These occurrences are included in Section 6 of our petition. At this point, I would like to call Mr. Travis Jones, the district inspector who has been assigned to the Stir Crazy Coffee issue. Mr. Jones can testify to the occasions he has detected odors from Stir Crazy Coffee. He can also testify that the owner of Stir Crazy Coffee received a petition and public notice of tonight's hearing. Travis?
Good evening.
Mr. Jones, can you state your position with the Air Pollution Control District?
I'm an inspector for the Air Pollution Control District.
And what's the primary sector or geographic area that you are responsible for?
I have Ventura to Ojai.
How long have you been an inspector for the district?
For 17 years now.
Okay. Did you personally serve the district's petition and public notice for this hearing on the owner of Stir Crazy Coffee?
Yes, I have. I delivered it to Stir Crazy, where I handed it to Janine Ames.
Okay. And what date was that?
Approximately May 10th in the morning.
And where was it that you delivered that petition?
It was at the facility, Stir Crazy Coffee.
Okay. And what, if anything, did Ms. Ames say to you at that time?
She recognized me and said hello, and then she further stated that I said I'm here to deliver a hearing board packet, and she wanted to know what this was about, and she received the packet and said that she wouldn't be going to a hearing.
Okay. Moving on a number of occasions, did you personally observe coffee roasting odors in the area of Stir Crazy Coffee?
Reading through the packet, it was about 12 times.
Okay. And whereabouts did you observe those odors?
In the vicinity of the parking lot, a couple of times on Orchard, one or two times near Villanova Street. And there's also an adjacent lot north of Stir Crazy where, at the far back of it, I've smelled it.
Okay. What was the farthest distance that you observed those odors? If you can.
The furthest is, I believe at one time that all three of us, Larry Scott, my supervisor, yourself, I believe it was as far as Villanova, to that corner.
Okay.
What I recall.
How do you know those odors came from Stir Crazy Coffee?
The coffee roasting has a very distinct odor. It's kind of like a burnt coffee smell, or it's actually like a burnt toast, but there's a bit of coffee smell to it. And once you smelled it, you know what it is.
Did you have any other way of determining that the odors were coming from Stir Crazy?
In prior inspections, smelling that odor, it's a familiar odor, so it's very distinct.
Okay. At any time, did you observe the direction of the plume, the smoke out the stack or anything? And
yeah, that would be one of the techniques to see which way the wind's blowing, if there's any wind at all, is it blowing toward the complainants.
Okay. When was the last time you observed the coffee roasting machine inside of Stir Crazy Coffee?
About 2 weeks ago, I was in the area, and I physically went up to the door and saw it was locked, and I looked in the window and saw the coffee roaster in place.
Okay. During the week of February 14th, 2007, you received a voicemail from Janine Ames, co-owner of Stir Crazy Coffee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And could you describe for the board members what she said in her voicemail?
Yeah, that was my last contact with her, short of delivering the packet. But her conversation was that she was dismantling the afterburner, taking the afterburner down, and also that she commented that if she needed coffee beans, she would roast with the afterburner removed.
Do you feel that there would be odor impacts if the afterburner was removed?
Yeah, we'd be right back to where we were at the beginning.
Okay. Those are all the questions I have for you.
Do any of the board members have any questions for Mr. Travis? I do. Oh, Mr. Duval, do you have any other witnesses today?
At this time, no. Mr. Jones would be our only witness.
Mr. Jones, the district has indicated that there were 230 complaints. How many? Obviously, 230 people don't live on Orchard Drive.
No.
So how many people are we talking about complaining about Stir Crazy?
Probably less than 10 people.
I have actually read, for some reason that I cannot understand, every single page in the 100-plus page report that was delivered to me. And in there, I noticed that over and again, you indicated that you went out to Stir Crazy and that the odor was not, by your standards, offensive. I'm reading from one from August of 2004. I returned to the complainant's house and once again smelled the odor, but I would say it was a 1 out of 10. The odor is a 1. In April of 2005, you went out to respond to a complaint and indicated that the complainant said the odor was a 4 on a scale of 10, but, quote, as we stood trying to detect the odor, we all agreed what was detected was non-offensive. The odor was described as toast cooking. And then later on in 11 of 05 and 12 of 05, you reported in response to several different complaints, I have been stir crazy on 2 separate occasions and have been unable to see any visible emissions or detect any odors. And you said that in 12/01/05 in response to some complaints that had taken place. And again, in 9 of 06, I would not describe the odor to be obnoxious or nauseating. And this happens over and over again in the, I'd say, inch-thick stack of documents that we were provided. I'm frankly baffled, and I don't want to lay this all on your shoulders, but why is it that when you went out there, we were getting report after report of non-offensive odors, and yet we're here trying to shut down a business or like shut down the coffee roasting portion of it because of what are deemed to be offensive odors? Can you explain the difference between your perceptions and the perceptions of the people on Orchard Drive?
Well, one thing, when we get a complaint, it would take me 20, 25 minutes to get there. So we're not experiencing, exactly what they're experiencing, number one. And they don't roast all day long. They might roast 2 hours in a day, or they might need, a couple of batches. And it's all about how much, the pounds of coffee. There's a lot of technique in the roasting operation itself. So what they may be smelling is something that I didn't smell. And it's a perception thing also, I believe.
In some of the complaint reports that we have from you, it indicates that Ms. Ames had suggested that the APCD come out and observe or perceive, if you will, a coffee roasting event. You did do that on several occasions.
Correct.
What were your perceptions at that time?
Again, at different places, if you're standing right next to the thing in the parking lot, it's pretty strong. It would be, I wouldn't want to live right next to, at that point, but depending on the wind, there's a lot of variables. If you were downwind, if the wind was right, possibly 150 feet away, you wouldn't want to be in your backyard,
The afterburner is an issue for me. When the afterburner was installed, the complaints dropped dramatically, correct?
Correct.
Why was the afterburner not permitted? Do we know?
It's less than 1 million BTU. It's a non-permitted item. It wasn't permitted through building and safety, is what we found out later.
That's my question, actually. It's not so much as why it's not permitted through APCD, but why did she not get a permit through building and safety?
I don't know.
Do we have anybody that's here today that can answer that question?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Does anyone else have any questions for the witness?
Mr. Jones, is it your opinion professionally that had the afterburner been installed correctly, it sounds as if there's some adjustment range, like the heat, the temperature to fully burn the VOCs?
The heat has to be over 1,200, 1,400
Was it ever
degrees.
professionally calibrated, or was this just a do-it-yourself install?
It was a homemade afterburner. It was homemade.
Oh, it was not an over-the-counter?
No, it wasn't.
Oh.
There was no temperature gauge even, but the proof is in, there was a whole lot less smoke with the afterburner. I mean, it was almost zero.
So it mitigated the problem, but it didn't
visibly
eliminate it.
There were still some odor issues, I think, but had they had a professional burner, I believe it would be. I believe it would be okay.
Complaint-free?
Virtually.
Is it your opinion that the reason that didn't happen is because the Ms. Ames didn't want to spend the money?
Yeah, that's what I understood.
Or couldn't be bothered?
It was a cost issue.
To be a good neighbor?
Yeah, there were a lot of things going on there that I've heard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Gasparino.
Yes, have you ever participated in an odor panel?
I can't say that I have, but doing this job for as long as I have, I feel like I've got a lot of OJT, you know, and odors.
Would you say that your sense of smell is pretty good?
I say extremely good, very acute.
Okay. May I ask a question of Mr. Duvall?
Please.
Would you please repeat again, I believe you said Ms. Ames sold the business?
The business is closed and is up for sale.
It is up for sale.
There's a for sale sign on it. As far as we know, it hasn't been sold yet.
Okay, and then I believe did you not state that the owner said, however, the coffee roaster still might be utilized until such time it's sold?
It was, Mr. Jones testified that in February of this last year, after they were required to take the coffee roaster off, the afterburner off, he received a voicemail from Ms. Ames stating that she might end up continuing to roast coffee beans. And I'll let Mr. Jones say exactly what he recollects from that.
Yeah, and actually the very last thing, just what Keith Duvall said, the very last thing she said, any further contact is to speak to her attorney. So we kind of lost communication at that point. But it basically said that if she needs coffee beans, she's going to roast, you know. And they were open on and off, you know. They would be open for a couple of days to sign. They have a red neon sign, open sign, and you know, a couple of days it'd be open and they're not open. So.
One last question, Mr. Jones. Did you happen to take a look at the roasting log, or is there such a thing so you could determine if roasting occurred sporadically or if it occurred in the mornings or afternoons?
Yeah, early on they were keeping a log and pretty free with showing the log. And, you know, if we had a complaint, I'd go over there and Mrs. Ames would share with me you know, what kind of roast, how many pounds it was. You know, they wouldn't, for instance, they wouldn't roast dark beans because it creates too much smoke and odor. They would buy those beans and they would roast the lights and the medium beans. But she did have a log, yes. But at a certain point, it was getting there was tension, and she wasn't as open with sharing the log.
Could you state, if you can, from the logs that you did observe, how soon after roasting you appeared in any one of these numerous events where you responded to a nuisance?
To a complaint?
Yes.
Maybe in the middle of she might do 4 batches, and by the time they're on the second batch, the complaint would come in. I would arrive maybe on the third and witness the end of maybe a third batch to a fourth batch. A batch being maybe up to 20 minutes in length.
Okay, thank you very much.
She would write down the pounds. Maximum capacity is 12 pounds for the green beans, and should have 6 to 8 pounds, for instance, in the log.
Dr. Scheckman.
Do you have any other coffee roasting enterprises in your area of responsibility?
Yes, I do.
Could you compare and contrast how they operate with the operation of this one?
Ojai Roasting has an afterburner now. For years they didn't. Then they also recently have a permit because they're over 25 pounds. They're like 26-pound capacity. But they've been roasting like 12 to 3 in the morning for years, and without an afterburner. And I think we've had just a few complaints from them. But now they have their own permit, they have an afterburner, and it's zero emissions, and the odor is actually, you know, I guess you could say almost pleasant, you know, compared to what it was.
Is it your opinion that a properly installed and operating afterburner would solve this problem at Stir Crazy?
Yes, I believe so. It's working in Ojai, and that they have double the capacity.
And do you know what the cost of such a unit would be?
It varies, of course. It could be 20 to 40,000. Ojai is about $40,000.
And is it your understanding that the reason that the safety permit wasn't granted is because the unit that Stir Crazy was using was a non-standard unit?
I'm not sure the question as far as, is it a cost
There's a
thing?
permit that she was unable to obtain.
Uh-huh.
And I'm asking if the reason she couldn't obtain it is because she was using a non-standard afterburner.
Well, I think the permit issue, it was that it's below a main BTU. It wouldn't be through us anyway. It would
No,
be
it's
through
not your
building and
permit.
safety.
Not your permit.
County.
The other permit.
The building and safety permit is what we're concerned
Yeah, I
about.
don't know anything other than what I stated about the building and safety permit.
Okay. Well, let me ask Mr. Duval, do you know anything about the building and safety permit?
The only information that I know is what Mr. Jones has already mentioned, is that we discovered, I think it was in January or February, that they didn't have a permit from Building and Safety. We were advised by the County Building and Safety that they were given I think it was a 30-day notice to remove the device. And I think my conversations with Mr. Jones around that time were that they decided just to take the afterburner out.
It seems germane to the issue before us to know whether it is within their range of options to put in a conforming afterburner and solve this problem.
I believe that a properly designed and controlled afterburner would go a long ways towards reducing the odors from the coffee roasting operation. I won't say that it would eliminate the odors.
Well, it would have to eliminate the nuisance,
That's correct.
not necessarily all the odor.
That's correct.
Normally, the district and the operator of a business are able at least to enter into a stipulated order of abatement, which leads to the necessary corrective action so that the business can continue to be in business and the air quality rules can be effectively enforced. Could you discuss any conversations you've had with the operator of Stir Crazy regarding the possibility of a stipulated order of abatement?
We haven't had any discussions with the owners about a stipulated order.
Well, she may not know of such a thing, but is there a reason why you would not have undertaken that conversation?
Well, with a stipulated order, typically what we would be allowing them to do would be to continue to operate while they took corrective action. And I didn't feel that in this case that was in the public's interest. The fact that she was required by Building and Safety to take the afterburner out of service and remove it from the facility, at that point she was going to have, Stir Crazy was going to have an uncontrolled coffee roaster and put us back to kind of square zero, you might say. And then finally, the last communication we had put a stop to any direct communication we had with her.
Have you heard from her attorney?
No.
So we have the empty chair over here where the
Yes.
answers to some of these questions would normally
Yes.
arise.
And Stir Crazy was hand-delivered a petition and public notice for tonight's hearing.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is Stir Crazy represented here today? Is there anyone in the room that represents the company? No. Mr. Duval, you said that you used the phrase uncontrolled coffee roaster. Let me clarify. This particular coffee roaster does not require an APCD permit, correct?
That's correct.
And it does not require a permit for the afterburner, as Mr. Jones has indicated.
That's
So the question, I think, that is on all of our minds at this point is why the afterburner had to be removed, because it seemed to be solving the problem. And that's a big issue for me, because if it is a bureaucratic issue where she didn't apply for a permit or if she didn't, then I will happily suggest to this board that we abate the nuisance by requiring an afterburner. But if she can't possibly get an afterburner, then we can't really put that order together. Do you see my problem? So I don't have, I'm having a little trouble because I don't have enough information, and that may be part of the problem. Maybe that Stir Crazy itself is not here to answer these questions. Any comment?
I would say that for a business, let's just say any business that would want to put a afterburner on a coffee roaster, obtaining a permit from the Building and Safety Department should not be an insurmountable hurdle. It costs money. It has to be designed correctly. It has to be signed off by engineers for structural, for mechanical. It operates with quite a large quantity of natural gas going into it, so there's maybe some fire department, county fire review that's involved in it. So I would imagine that the permit process is expensive. I doubt if the afterburner and installation that they had would have met the building and safety review criteria, but I don't think it's an insurmountable hurdle for somebody to get a building and safety permit to make such an installation.
Mr. Stubblefield.
Mr. Duval, is it not correct that when Ms. Ames, is that her?
Yes.
Yeah, came to the district and asked whether or not she could be exempted from a permit, she was told she was exempted because the amount of coffee that she was going to roast was below the threshold necessary to require a permit. That's correct, right?
That's correct, yes.
But she was also told that she would not be exempt from Rule 51, the nuisance rule. Is that correct?
That's
So
correct.
she knew that going in.
Yes.
And this is I know this area. I'm familiar with it. It's a kind of a mixed use. I assume these are residents here. It's mainly residential, although there's some businesses along 33. So she knew that going in.
That's correct.
Okay. And there have been, I didn't read as many complaints as Ms. Neiswender did, but I read a lot of them. And I noticed that it didn't seem like there was any particular time when she roasted coffee beans. I saw some complaints at 3:15 a.m., 5:30, some in the daytime. Because my first reaction was, well, you know, everybody would be at work if this was carried out in the day. And then I thought, but she's catering to people buying a cup of coffee, going to work in the morning, commuters who are going to hit the store early. So probably she did roast a lot of coffee early in the morning. So it looked as if a lot of the people complaining were saying, I smelled this. I was asleep. I smelled it. It woke me up. Is that your observation?
Yes.
So it seems to me what's not being said here is that the burden, I would say, is on the petitioner, well, not the petitioner, in this she's not the petitioner, but the owner, to have shown good faith. You have said that had she bought some over-the-counter technology, albeit expensive, it's what you said, $25,000 to $40,000, but had she done that, it would have, if I understood you correctly, it would have cleared up not just the emissions, the 3 different VOCs that it emitted and some other stuff, but it would have also virtually eliminated the nuisance? Is that?
I would say so.
Based on your experience with other
Right. 40,000
similar outfits?
was for the 25 pounds, so it was double. So, you know, I would maybe less than 20 grand for.
And then it sounds to me as if I understand you correctly, it was a homemade burner, it was not an over-the-counter model, and it was installed without a building permit, essentially.
Correct.
Which is not the
what we found out.
responsibility of the APCD. It's building and safety.
Correct.
And they found out about it somehow and said, take it out. You don't have a permit for this. So at that point, the correct thing to do would have been to have got a permit. But she didn't want to do that. So she took it out and went on roasting beans, and the complaints went way up again. Is that pretty much what happened? And then she was invited to be here today before our board. That's not what happened?
She was invited.
Right, she was invited and
And
chose to not show up.
Right.
Thank you.
One point of clarification on your chronology. It was in February of this year that building and safety made her take the afterburner out. We don't know the exact date that it was taken out. I think in early March, the first week in March, we received an odor complaint. But about the time that the afterburner came out, we suspect that she quit roasting coffee beans. Maybe not completely, but I think from February, through the first week of March, we may have received a couple complaints. But if it would have been if she would have been roasting coffee beans without the afterburner full time, we would have been receiving quite a few complaints. So I think about the time that she took it out, she pretty much quit roasting coffee beans.
Dr. Schachman.
Yes, Mr. Duval. How many facilities in the jurisdiction have you permitted for coffee roasting?
I'm going to have to kind of count on my fingers here. Ojai Coffee, Moore's, Brazuca,
Bourbon Tree,
International Tea and Coffee, and a facility, Clean Foods. So
Moore's. You said more?
Moore's.
More coffee.
So there's, I believe, maybe about 5 or 6 coffee roasters in the county that we have permits with. Our permit threshold, several years ago, we adopted a rule that requires coffee roasters with a capacity of over 25 pounds of roasting capacity to get a permit from us. The coffee roaster at Stir Crazy Coffee is about 12 pounds capacity, so it's under that threshold. So the 5 or 6 that we have on permit are over 25 pounds. 2 of them are very large commercial size coffee roasters. The rest are just the smaller kind of neighborhood type coffee roasters.
Stir Crazy, as I understand it, is primarily a retail coffee seller.
That's
They're
my
roasting for their own use to sell coffee to people who come in for a cup of coffee. And there must be hundreds of retail coffee shops in Ventura County. How do most of them deal with this issue?
Most of the coffee shops buy their beans already roasted.
Mm-hmm.
Starbucks, Coffee Bean, and Tea Leaf, everywhere that you turn these days, they buy their beans already roasted.
Is there a premium price for beans roasted on premises? Well,
we've been told over the years that it's cheaper to roast your beans on your premises. Lower cost to buy the green beans and roast them yourself. But I think
wondering
also
if it's a marketing tool, though.
I was just kind of going there. I think part of it is kind of an ambiance that you can go in and see the coffee roaster. It's my understanding, though, is that in situations like Stir Crazy, that they'll roast 10, 15 pounds of beans a day and use those throughout the day to brew their coffee throughout the day. It's not that you go and order a cup of coffee and they roast them right there for you.
This abatement order does not put their retail coffee business out of business. This only would stop the roasting.
That's correct.
One other question about the afterburner technology. Is that being used by all of the permitted facilities?
I believe it's there might be 2 or maybe 2 small ones that I'm not aware of. Ojai Coffee Roasting up in Ojai, Moore's Coffee, which is on Ventura Avenue in the Ventura area, has an afterburner. International Coffee and Tea, Clean Foods, Brazuca, I'm not sure if they have an afterburner.
They're installing one.
Okay.
What I'm getting at is whether this is a reliable technology.
It's a technology that's been around for a long time. It's used in a lot of different applications, and it appears to be working quite well for the coffee roasters that do have afterburners installed.
Well, thanks. That's all the questions I have right now.
Mr. Hurlock.
Mr. Travis, one of the things we're looking at is, I'm interested in, some of the language in Rule 51 talks about nuisance or annoyance to any considerable number of persons or to the public, or which endangers the comfort, repose, health, and safety of any such persons or the public. And when Mr. Duval asked you some things about distances and numbers, you weren't maybe as quantitative as I might have liked. You said less than, or I think you said less than 10 people are probably the origin of these 230 complaints. Is that what I understood you to say?
I believe so.
How much less than 10?
There's been a handful that were the primary group.
I see that we have some public comment cards, and then we can judge that for ourselves, but I'm just trying to get your input on this.
Early on, there was different folks that were complaining.
When you said that the distance was as far as Villanova, at least to me that doesn't mean anything. How far is that? And then in follow-up to that, I'm going to want to know, like, how many residences are in that radius in the downwind direction?
The predominant wind direction, the wind's coming out of the south, or actually from the west, but the most of the residents that have been complaining are north of Stir Crazy. And the way the wind kind of blows through there, it comes in possibly west, southwest, and it kind of funnels up through the Ventura River.
Does that plume then, do you think, goes over the properties of 3 homes or 30 homes?
It could be in a radius of 200 feet to 300, which would be, I don't know, 5 or 6 homes, maybe more. It depends what you're talking about, whether you smelled it, if you caught a scent of it, of the odor, or if you're impacted by,
I guess what I'm trying to get is an answer to my question as to whether a considerable number of people, which is the way the rule is written, is being discomforted or endangered. That's not very quantitative, but I'm hoping you can be a little bit more quantitative.
Yeah, and that's what's been so hard about this. Is it depends on the severity of the discharge out of the exhaust. It depends on the wind. Depends on the uplifting nature of. There's a lot of variables. So, and that's what's been so hard about this.
But I'm not talking about the environmental variables. I'm talking about the number of homes and the number of people who are complaining. Are the sources of these 230 complaints? Do you?
As far as the number of the homes that could be impacted?
No, the number of homes that are the source of the complaints that we have in our package.
I guess it's probably 10 or so. I don't know exactly.
Thank you.
Any further questions of the witness or the board?
I have a question of our counsel to comment on the matter at hand of the meaning of the nuisance rule, the number of persons.
This, for the record, was an issue that Mr. Hurlock alerted me to be a question he would pose, and in an email, and basically just said, what does a considerable number of people mean? There actually is a case on this, but the case kind of punts the issue. It's People versus General Motors Corp. It's an appellate department in L.A. It's not even a court of appeal. And they go through both the penal code, the civil code, and the health and safety code. It's actually a health and safety code case. All have that same language, and that language is found commonly across the country, considerable number of people, and it basically comes down to a reasonable person standard of what the circumstances provide from what I can understand from the case. In other words, if you had a neighborhood and 10 of 10 houses complained and no one asked the other 40 of the 50 residents, then you've got unanimity of those asked. On the other hand, if you had 100 houses and only 10 of the 100 complained and 90 said they were fine with it, then you'd have what might not be a considerable number of people. It might be people that are overly sensitive. It's something within your domain for deciding. There is no test on it. The court basically said that was not decided by the jury and we don't decide it. But the kind of things to look to are what a reasonable person would, faced with that odor, say. The court pointed out that there are odometers but no odorometers, that there's no way to scientifically measure this, that it is something that people know when they smell it and or get sick by it. So that's about the best I can do. That's the only case on it that I could find in California.
Madam Chair, if I could add some information here. Historically, it's been our policy in the district that we would take action when we have 6 to 10 complainants. But historically, the types of nuisances that we deal with are very short matters. Dust from a construction site. Somebody is putting an asphalt roof on their house, and there's that asphalt pot that just stinks. So very typically, kind of very short-term odor problems or issues are the ones that we deal with, and we've typically said between 6 to 10 complaints is sufficient for us to take action. In the case of stir crazy, the predominant wind is coming up Ventura Avenue. The Orchard Drive is elevated above the stack level of Stir Crazy Coffee. And as you can imagine, Ventura Avenue and up there through Oakview and this part of Ojai it's a valley and it's got twists and turns. A lot of times the wind, 15 minutes it'll be going this way and then it kind of shifts on you and turns around. But the residents on Orchard Drive, they're elevated up above the stack height. And I think what's happening is that the plume comes out of the coffee roaster or the afterburner. It's heated, so it has some buoyancy, but it doesn't have a really strong exhaust fan on it to give it a very high ejection out the stack. And with the predominant winds, it goes up and into the residences on Orchard Drive. I think the majority of people that you'll hear from later, the neighbors who live on Orchard Drive, are those residents who are closest to the stack along Orchard Drive. As one of your board members pointed out, this area up there it's kind of a mixed-use area along Ventura Avenue. It's predominantly right along the avenue. It's predominantly commercial, but you get a little bit off the road. There's some mobile home parks. There's some residences up on the hillside, and I think it's just the dynamics of the topography, the meteorology, and the location of where the residents live that causes them to have the direct impact.
Perhaps it would be an appropriate time to have members of the public speak. I'm sure we'll have more questions for the district afterwards, but I know these folks have been waiting to talk for a while. So if Tommy Storm would come forward, and then after that, Nancy Nordstrom. Mr. Herlock has reminded me of something that I did not know. If you choose to take an oath before you testify, we can consider that as evidence that must be considered formally for this proceeding. If not, it's public comment and everyone can testify. But if you would choose to take an oath, we would ask that you raise your right hand, and perhaps the other people who
I think we did it in,
Some of you, if you did already,
I
then
already did.
in that case, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Tony Storm. I live at 1643 Orchard Drive in the Ojai Valley. I'm appearing before each of you to support the need for an abatement order because since early 2002, my wife and I have been continuously impacted by the stench and dangerous gases coming from Sir Crazy's coffee roasting activities. These dangerous gases have impacted our health and the ability to fully use and enjoy our home, our yard. In the beginning, we called on one of Sir Crazy's owners and asked him to stop roasting coffee because of the stench and the sickening effects. Since that time, countless calls have been made to APCD asking them to help us by taking action against Sir Crazy's air polluting activities. After 5 years, we continue to suffer from the stench and the dangerous gases coming from Sir Crazy's coffee roasting. When Sir Crazy roasts coffee and the wind blows in our direction, we are impacted. As an example, my wife and I both experience immediate throat problems. And the gases make us both feel like we have to continuously clear our throats, like there is something here, not just once or twice, but continuously, sometimes for days. These impacts just described eventually became so bad that my wife had to consult an ear, nose and throat specialist who, after several visits, concluded that she was probably having allergic reactions from something in the air. We have concluded, my wife and I, that these symptoms coincide with the detectable coffee roasting smell. The impacts of the smell and gases coming from roasting coffee beans also make us feel like sick to our stomach and often that we feel like we have to vomit. As a recent example, on Saturday, March the 3rd, at about 3:45 in the morning, the worst, scariest, and most impacting event occurred we had ever experienced. When we were awakened by the smell of the coffee roasting gases and started to close the windows, I instantly got an headache and I felt sick. So sick that I had to go back to bed and I had to stay in bed the whole Saturday. Every time that Saturday when I tried to get up, I felt like having to throw up and also experienced that I fell over trying to walk. These feelings lasted through Sunday and the headache did not quit until the following Wednesday. On September 22, 2006, the impacted residents, including my wife and I, sent a complete report and request for action to the Ventura County Air Pollution Control Board. In this letter, reference was made to a recent EPA report concerning one of the most irritating compounds in coffee roasting gases. This gas is called acrolein. And its effects range from highly irritating to toxic and eventually to fatal. It's clearly stated in the EPA report that humans cannot adapt to this gas. If coffee roasting takes place during the day and we happen to be outside, we have to immediately go back into the house. Then we have to close all windows and doors and stay inside until the gases are dissipated. Based on the above described impacts, and also since Sir Crazy has removed the exhaust gas burner that he had installed on the roof, we believe that the only way to stop the discharge of acrolein and other irritating gases by Sir Crazy is to approve the abatement order and stop roasting coffee beans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And Ms. Nordstrom, if you'd come forward after Ms. Nordstrom, Verla Rear, please.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Nancy Nordstrom. I live at 1629 Orchard Drive in the Ojai Valley. Our property is approximately 3/4 of an acre, a little bit larger. My 91-year-old mother, who could not be here tonight, lives next door, and her property is over 1/2 an acre. So they're large pieces of property. Pertaining to the abatement order on your agenda today, For the last several years, it has been rare for us to leave a window or door open on the west and south sides of our home because of our inability to know when stir crazy would roast coffee beans and contaminate the atmosphere with such a horrible, sickening odor that even the best room spray could not neutralize it. Nighttime roasting has typically been the worst because by the time the gases wake up my husband and me, they are all through our house and we can't get them out. Please imagine a warm summer night and leaving a window open for fresh air while you sleep, and then being wakened with an awful, bitter smell like burning treated wood. Sometimes we feel that there may be a fire in the area, only to find out later that it was stir-crazy roasting coffee beans again. This is an experience that we have endured far too many times. Also, enjoying working in our yard or having friends and family over for outdoor activities have almost become a thing of the past. When the odor of coffee bean roasting passes over our property, the sickening smell can only be relieved by getting back into the house quickly. It is quite maddening to think that for every cup of coffee served at Stir Crazy, someone in our neighborhood may have been made sick, had a sleepless night, and been denied the freedom to enjoy their property. In conclusion, please try and place yourselves in our home and in our neighborhood, and then try to imagine the feeling of despair we've experienced after taking just a few breaths of coffee roasting gases and becoming desperately sick to our stomachs. What I would like to ask each of you to do now is to imagine breathing caustic gases, getting sick to your stomach, and not being able to use a home and a yard that you have worked for over 40 years of your life. For this reason and others I have described, please approve the abatement orders submitted by the staff. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ms. Nordstrom. Verla Rear, please, and then Rosemary Bielschmidt.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Verla Rear, and I live at 40 Don Antonio Way in the Ojai Valley, on the other side of the highway from Stir Crazy. For several years now, I have been impacted by the smell coming from Stir Crazy, and would like to share some of my experiences in support of approving the abatement order. At first, about 5 years ago, I was sitting in my living room smelling an odor and getting a burn sensation in my throat. Then I went around to every room in my home, checking the electrical outlets for fire. The smell reminded me of a burning coffee pot handle on the stove, which did not make sense at that time, since I only had an electric coffee maker. Next, I went outside and was blasted by a horrible smell that I then discovered was coming from Stir Crazy on the other side of Highway 33. One day last year in August, the smell of coffee roasting beans was so bad that I called APCD to complain and mentioned that it made me sick. One of the APCD's inspectors came out and helped me fill out a complaint form. After finishing, but before signing the complaint, the inspector asked if I would be willing to testify to what I said about the impacts under oath, and I said yes. I sincerely hope that the hearing board will help me and all other people in my mobile home park to stay healthy. Also, I don't want to be afraid of getting sick anymore from the stink and gases in the air coming from roasting coffee beans. Finally, please adopt the opposed abatement order. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herrera. Ms. Bielschmidt, and then Ralph Steele after that. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Rosemary Bielschmidt, and I live at 1501 Orchard Drive in the Ojai Valley. I would like to begin by asking each of you to please approve the abatement order, because over the last 5 years, my health and the use of my home and the enjoyment of my yard have been impacted by coffee roasting gases coming from Stir Crazy Company, located at 11534 North Ventura Avenue in the Miramonte area of the Ojai Valley. When the coffee roasting impacts first began, I was awakened about 2:30 a.m. by a frightening odor smelling like fire smoke, but with a bitter, putrid smell. I feared there was a fire and frantically searched my home, yard, and street, yet could not find the source of the wretched stench. Starting with that frightening night, our neighborhood has been impacted by frequent coffee roasting gases, affecting the air I breathe and limiting the routine use of my home, yard, and daily walks. At this time, I would like to share with you exactly how these coffee roasting gases affect me physically. First, my eyes start to burn and weep, and then my sinuses fill up with so much that breathing becomes difficult. Then this is followed by inflamed nasal passages, and my throat becomes irritated and sore, with my voice becoming hoarse and gravelly. My physical symptoms typically continue intensely for several hours and then are followed by headaches that can last for many days. Following a recent roasting event in early March, I experienced inflamed nasal passages and a throat irritation lasting over 3 weeks. For reference, just over 4 years ago, during April 2003, my neighbors and I sent a petition to APCD with 10 signatures asking them to take action to stop Stir Crazy's coffee roasting. The same impacts that I just described a moment ago, along with others, were used to support how every criterion in Rule 51 had been met. Finally, I hope that each one of you can appreciate that if the situation weren't so damaging, we would not be here this afternoon. Also, if the situation weren't so unbearable, we would not have submitted so many complaints. And with one of the worst coffee roasting events occurring about 2.5 months ago on March 3rd, I respectfully request that the board approve the abatement order so that I can enjoy better health during my retirement years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bielschmidt. Now, Mr. Steele, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Ralph Steele, and I live at 1579 Orchard Drive in the Ojai Valley. I would like to share what it is like to be exposed to coffee roasting gases, and in one word, it's horrible. It's like burned bread, burned bone, and burned rubber all mixed together at the same time. But that's just the beginning, because it has burned my eyes, nose, mouth, and throat, while producing an incredibly stinky discharge from my nose and throat for days. Then the dry hacking cough starts, and this can typically last for 3 to 4 weeks after just a few minutes of exposure. These impacts can happen because one of the key chemicals in coffee roasting gases, as reported by the World Health Organization in Geneva, is acrolein, and it can easily penetrate the cell walls of humans' mucous membranes as well as the skin. In addition, there were the emotional impacts of horror when I woke up at night thinking that my house was on fire and I was losing everything. Over the following weeks and months, this feeling of horror has been replaced by anger, hopelessness, despair, and depression. From time to time, I have been asked to describe the impacts of coffee roasting gases and compare them with something else. Well, the first thing I usually mention is that coffee roasting gases are not like the pleasant odor of fresh brewed coffee in a cup. Instead, coffee roasting gases are something like tear gas, but far more powerful, because gases coming from coffee roasting can produce a violent urge to vomit after as little as 2 moderate breaths. In addition, after repetitious exposure to high-level gas impacts, especially over the last year, going back to last summer, the lining of my airway has become so sensitive that even minor scents can trigger violent coughing that can last for hours. Finally, to help place our comments in perspective, when we refer, that's we, our group, when we refer to a smell, odor, stink, or stench associated with coffee roasting, that's just the beginning. And while it's truly horrible, as I mentioned in the beginning, the thing that impacts us even more is the combination of short and long-term impacts on our bodies and our emotions. To make a long story as short as I can, until a qualitative and quantitative chemical analysis is conducted of the gases coming out of coffee roasters that do not have high temperature afterburners capable of breaking down tightly bound gas molecules, we don't know what we're being impacted by in addition to acrolein. As far as the types and amounts of gases that can be found, I feel that based on the World Health Organization's reports, we're going to find derivatives of pesticides, herbicides, and defoliants that are still allowed in third world countries where coffee is grown, but are not allowed in the U.S. One of those identified by the World Health Organization is the defoliant known as one of those found is the defoliant known as Agent Orange, and we're all old enough to know the meaning of Agent Orange. Also, Madam Chair and members of the board, there's nothing to be gained by providing the owners of Stir Crazy with any additional time, because now that they have removed the afterburner on the roasting machine's gas stack, it is not possible to reduce the impacts of the coffee roasting gas plume on adjacent residents. And furthermore, it was concluded on page 4 of the staff report that you have before you for this hearing that even with an afterburner on the exhaust of its coffee roasting machine, Stir Crazy would continue to be a source of offensive odors in the surrounding neighborhood. In conclusion, Madam Chair, members of the board, I'd like to ask you to vote to approve the abatement order, because continuing to roast coffee beans and produce gases listed by the state of California as hazardous, such as acrolein and formaldehyde, is unacceptable, dangerous, and will continue to severely impact our neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to provide testimony to the board? With that, I would call the hearing closed. Is there any discussion by the board? Mr. Stubblefield.
My feeling is that we should concur with the with staff's recommendation and issue an order of abatement and close this operation down.
Mr. Herlock.
I just wanted to respond to your comments about conditions. I think that an abatement order would put the respondent in a position of, if they wanted to, approaching the board, asking the board what will we do now, and then the board could use their discretion with conditions. That it would not be appropriate necessarily for, that the district, let me start over, that the respondent with an abatement order could approach the district and say what can we do, if anything, and the district could, if they decided to, provide conditions and come back to us. I don't think that this board needs to put conditions on the proposed abatement order.
Dr. Chapman.
I'm persuaded by what I've heard tonight that the board should grant the abatement order proposed by the district.
Mr. Gasparino.
Sure, why not? I'd like to thank the folks that were sworn in to provide your input to us. I think I certainly understand and hopefully can sense what you're going through. I guess for purposes of being on the record, I'm extremely disappointed that Ms. Ames did not bother to show up, that she has made apparently gestures or comments that the afterburner's down, the place is up for sale, but I might roast coffee anyway. That really disturbs me and bothers me quite a bit. And in lieu of the fact that staff has done, I think, the best job that they can to validate the nuisance complaints, and we've had testimony from residents in the area, I too support the abatement order without any conditions.
I have a different feel for it. I do think that there's no option for this board today but to grant the order of abatement. If Ms. Ames had been here, there might have been a different picture that was presented. I am particularly interested in why the afterburner was removed. If it worked, and if it did what it was supposed to do and limited the complaints severely, then why did it have to be removed? Was there a conflict between, for example, building and safety and APCD, where she was under the impression that she didn't need a permit? A representative of the county tells a member of the public, especially a small business owner that's not that sophisticated, you don't need a permit. In their heads, they say, I don't need a permit, period. There's no, I need to go to building and safety, I need to go to different agencies to make sure that everyone doesn't need a permit. So there's a part of my head that's telling me perhaps she was under a misimpression. Without her being here, we cannot possibly know what was going on in her head. And as a result, I think that I agree with Mr. Gasparino, we don't really have a choice here but to grant the order of abatement. However, I would condition it. I would suggest to this board that we grant the order of abatement with the condition that if an afterburner is installed, that the district lift the order of abatement. Again, in echoing Mr. Gasparino's comments, I am very disappointed she did not show up here. I don't see a lack of good faith, which was something that was discussed previously. The records that we have from the district show that she roasted at anywhere from 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m., 6:30, 9, 10, 11, 12, 2, 1, 3, 4, 5. She tried to roast at different times of the day to come up with a better option. But regardless of whether she was trying or not trying, it obviously still resulted in nuisance complaints. So we're in a position where we have to do something to protect the neighborhood. And I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
I would not be amenable to your modification. I want just an order of abatement. I'm not interested in bargaining with this person who chose not to show up. In my view, and I want to thank all of you for coming, and your testimony was eloquent and moving. I think that this business owner has shown what's not being said here is this woman has a bad attitude. I think that's pretty self-apparent. It's pretty self-evident. And to cap it all off, she chose not to even come here and state her case tonight, or even send an attorney or any representative whatsoever. I'm not willing to put that on the district that she didn't show up. She didn't show up. She was told, and she chose not to. So as far as I'm concerned, I want to make a motion that we issue the order of abatement, period.
I'd like to second that. We used the language in the draft order of abatement. I feel this is the time and the place where the respondent should have been here to state her side of it. If she couldn't make it, to send her representative. And anything that we speculate about her and her motives is just that, it's speculation. What we have on the record, to me, was very persuasive. And I think we have to go with the language of the draft abatement order, which is the second of your motion.
Thank you.
We have a motion, we have a discussion. Second, do we have any discussion? Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Gasparino?
Aye.
Dr. Shackman?
Aye.
Mr. Herlock?
Aye.
Mr. Stubblefield?
Aye.
Chair Niswander?
No. The district's petition for an order of abatement has been granted, and unless we have further discussion or comments, Mr. Duval?
No other items for tonight.
And nothing coming up in the future that we have scheduled at this point? Chris? No?
We have another abatement order that will probably be coming back the middle of June. And
That's right.
we need to have an election of the new chair at that in June.
Okay. Well, in that case, we'll probably see you in June, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight.
I'm going to be away from, for the entire month of June.
Uh-oh. We can probably survive without you.
I hope so.
Everyone else is here.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. He's not here, he's the chair.
I think it's your turn. I believe you get promoted. It's your turn.